The impossible proposal. The grand throne room of the Zyran Empire was filled with silence. Hundreds of alien nobles, warriors, and officials stood in neat rows, their glowing eyes fixed on the human standing at the center. At the far end of the hall, seated on a towering golden throne, was the Emperor of Zyran himself. His sharp blue eyes looked down at the scene before him. Standing beside the Emperor was Princess Zyra, the strongest warrior of her people, the pride of the Zyran race. But right now, she was staring in shock and disbelief, because the Emperor had just said something outrageous. "Human warrior, you have saved my daughter's life. As per our ancient law, she must become your wife." The words echoed in the vast hall. A moment later, the nobles erupted into whispers and gasps. Some aliens looked furious, some looked amused, and others seemed shocked. At the center of it all stood Captain Daniel Carter, a human soldier from Earth, dressed in his standard black military uniform, with a single cut on his cheek from the recent battle. His dark brown eyes flickered with confusion as he processed the words. "Wait, what?" He finally spoke. "You want me to marry the princess?" Zyra snapped her head towards him, her golden hair flowing behind her. Her purple eyes burned with anger. "This must be a mistake," she shouted. "I do not need a human husband." The Emperor's face remained calm. "The law is clear. He saved your life, Zyra, and by the traditions of our ancestors, a life saved is a life given." Daniel ran a hand through his short brown hair, completely overwhelmed. He had been in hundreds of battles against alien pirates, rogue warlords, and even hostile planets, but he had never expected this. "Look, Your Highness," he said carefully, "I just did what anyone would do. Zyra was surrounded by enemies. I stepped in, fought alongside her, and we both survived. I don't need a reward, and I definitely don't need a wife." The court fell silent again. Then, suddenly, laughter. A deep, mocking voice filled the air. "So the mighty Princess Zyra is now a human's bride. How amusing." Daniel turned his head and saw Varkan, the Emperor's distant nephew, a tall, muscular alien warrior, dressed in dark red armor, leaned against a pillar, grinning. He had always been Zyra's rival, and now he looked like he was enjoying the moment. "Shut your mouth, Varkan," Zyra hissed, fists clenched. "Why? It's funny," Varkan sneered. "You always act so strong, but in the end, you need a human to protect you." Zyra's face turned red with anger. Daniel sighed. "Look, I don't want this marriage, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't either, so let's just forget about this law and move on." The Emperor's face darkened. "That is not an option." Daniel's stomach tightened. Something was wrong. "What do you mean?" The Emperor stood up, his powerful voice shaking the walls. "The Zyran people value honor. If you refuse this marriage, it will be seen as an insult to our traditions. My daughter will be shamed. The alliance between Zyran and Earth may be broken. And worst of all," his eyes locked onto Daniel's, "you will never leave this planet alive." Daniel's heartbeat slowed for a moment. Then he exhaled. So this was not just a personal issue. This was political. If he refused, it could cause a galactic crisis between humans and the Zyran Empire. Zyra stepped forward, arms crossed. "You expect me to accept this?" she demanded. The Emperor's gaze softened slightly. "You have 3 days. Both of you. Discuss, decide. But if you refuse, the consequences will be severe." The room was dead silent. Daniel and Zyra exchanged a long, tense glance. Neither of them spoke. The court was dismissed, and Daniel was escorted to his guest chamber. The door shut behind him, leaving him alone in the lavish alien room, his mind racing. "This is insane. I saved her, and now I have to marry her." He paced back and forth. He knew one thing. He wasn't about to get trapped in a forced marriage, no matter what law they had. But before he could think of a plan, something strange happened. A small metallic sphere rolled into his room. It beeped softly, then projected a holographic message onto the wall. A distorted voice whispered, "Run, before it's too late. Someone wants you dead." Daniel froze, every muscle in his body tensing. His blood ran cold. Who sent this message, and why did they want him dead? He turned toward the door, his instincts screaming that something was very, very wrong. Assassins in the shadows. Daniel stared at the hologram flickering on the wall. The message was short, but the meaning was clear. Run, before it's too late. Someone wants you dead. His instincts screamed at him. This was a warning, a serious one. He took a step forward, scanning the room. The walls were smooth black stone, the furniture carved from an alien metal. There were no vents, no obvious places for someone to slip in. The only way inside was the massive silver door, which was locked from the outside. Who had sent this warning? The Emperor. Unlikely. If the old man wanted him dead, he wouldn't bother with a secret message. Zahra. No way. She was furious, but she didn't seem the type to stab someone in the back. If she wanted him gone, she'd do it face to face with a sword in her hand. Then who? The door hissed open. Daniel tensed, fists clenched. A tall alien guard entered. His green skin glowed under the dim lights, his armor gleaming. "You are summoned." Daniel frowned. Summoned? By who? The guard didn't answer, just gestured for him to follow. Daniel's mind raced as he stepped into the dark hallway. The palace was eerily quiet, the usual energy of the royal court missing. The guards outside were on edge, gripping their weapons a little too tightly. Something was wrong. They turned a corner, entering a grand staircase that spiraled down into the lower palace. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Daniel's hand itched for a weapon. His knife had been taken when he arrived. Another corridor. Another set of guards. Then they reached a pair of massive doors, black metal with glowing red symbols carved into them. The guard pressed a hand against the door. It rumbled open. Daniel stepped inside, and immediately his body tensed. A room of shadows. The chamber was dark, lit only by dim blue torches lining the walls. At the center stood three figures, draped in long, hooded robes. Their faces were hidden, their alien eyes glowing under their hoods. A fourth person stood behind them. Varkan. His arms were crossed, a smirk on his lips. "Ah, the human arrives." Daniel didn't move. His instincts screamed danger. This wasn't a friendly meeting. One of the hooded figures stepped forward. A woman's voice echoed through the chamber. "You are an outsider." Daniel narrowed his eyes. No kidding. The figure ignored his sarcasm. The marriage must not happen. Now that got his attention. "Good," Daniel said. "Then we're on the same page. I don't want to marry her either." The robed woman tilted her head. "Yet you still live." Daniel's gut tightened. "Should I not?" She didn't answer. Instead, another figure stepped forward, this one holding a dagger. The silver blade gleamed under the torchlight. "The old emperor is a fool." The second figure spoke, his voice deep and guttural. "He believes your kind can be trusted. But we know the truth. Humans bring only war." Daniel exhaled, nodding slowly. "Ah, so this is about politics. You don't want peace with Earth." Varkan chuckled from behind them. "Peace is a lie. Human." The first woman spoke again. "If the marriage happens, humans will gain influence over the empire. We cannot allow that." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "And if I refuse?" The woman's voice turned ice cold. "Then we no longer need you alive." Daniel's mind snapped into focus. It was a trap. They never planned to let him walk away. His eyes flickered to the exits. Two guards at the doors, heavily armed. Varkan stood near the back, watching with amusement. The robed figures were blocking the main path. He was surrounded, outnumbered, unarmed. Not great odds. Daniel slowly raised his hands. "All right, let's talk about this. Maybe we can." A sharp click sounded behind him. The door slammed shut. Then, the lights went out. The attack. Daniel moved instantly. He dropped low, spinning toward the nearest torch. In the darkness, he heard movement, the rustle of robes, the hiss of a blade slicing air. They were coming for him. Fast. He grabbed the torch from the wall, swinging it like a weapon. The fire illuminated the chamber for a split second, long enough for him to see a dagger flashing toward his throat. He twisted away just in time. The blade grazed his shoulder, cutting through fabric. Pain burned, but he didn't stop. The first assassin lunged again. Daniel ducked, then slammed the torch into the attacker's face. The figure stumbled back, cloak catching fire. A second figure attacked. Daniel spun, grabbing the dagger from the fallen assassin's belt. Steel clashed against steel. The third figure grabbed his arm. A needle flashed in the dim light. Poison. Daniel's instincts screamed. He slammed his head back, cracking it against the assassin's face. The figure stumbled, the needle clattering to the ground. He rolled away, breathing hard. One down, two more standing. Varkan, gone. He had slipped away in the chaos. Daniel's gaze snapped to the final figure. The woman. She hadn't moved, just watching. Then she raised a hand. The guards charged in. Daniel's heartbeat pounded. No way out. Then, the wall exploded. Syra's arrival. A flash of purple energy burst through the chamber. The walls shattered inward, sending debris flying. Through the smoke, a familiar figure emerged. Princess Syra. Her eyes blazed with fury, her twin swords spinning in her hands. She cut through the guards like a storm. One fell with a scream. Another's weapon was knocked aside. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fallen dagger, turned, and drove it into the final assassin's side. The robed woman gasped, stumbling back. Silence fell over the chamber. Then Syra turned to Daniel, breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" Daniel wiped blood from his cheek. "Only my pride." She frowned. "We need to leave. Now." Daniel didn't argue. Whatever was happening, this wasn't over. As they ran through the ruined corridor, Syra whispered, "Varkan has betrayed the Empire. And if we don't stop him, he'll take the throne and kill us both." Daniel exhaled. Of course, this just got worse. The dark truth. The cold night air bit into Daniel's skin as he ran through the dark corridors of the palace. The sounds of battle still echoed in the distance, clashing swords, distant shouts, the hum of energy weapons firing. But here, in the underbelly of the Empire, everything was eerily silent. Princess Syra moved ahead of him, her footsteps light and quick. She knew these halls well, taking sharp turns through the maze of stone pathways, leading Daniel deeper into the palace's hidden tunnels. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. No sign of pursuit yet, but he knew better than to relax. Varkan's betrayal meant that no one in the palace could be trusted. Syra suddenly stopped in front of a massive steel door. Her hands glowed faintly as she pressed them against the control panel. A thin, sharp beam of blue light scanned her palm, and the door slid open with a deep hiss. Daniel's instincts flared. Something about this place felt wrong. A forgotten chamber. The room inside was nothing like the rest of the palace. Where the throne room had been grand and golden, this place was dark and cold, the air thick with the scent of dust and metal. Tall glass tubes lined the walls, each one filled with a strange blue liquid, and inside them, floating figures. Daniel froze. Humans. There were humans inside the tubes. Syra turned toward him, her expression grim. "This is the Empire's greatest secret." Daniel stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. What the hell is this? He stared at the figures trapped in the tubes, their bodies floating, motionless, connected to thin wires and tubes feeding into their veins. Some looked young, others old and frail. His stomach twisted. This wasn't science. This was something else. "They're alive," he whispered. Zaira nodded. "Barely." Daniel turned to her, anger burning behind his eyes. "Explain." Zaira took a deep breath. A long time ago, humans and Zirin were allies. Not just politically, but genetically. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the tubes. "Our ancestors didn't just fight side by side. They experimented together. Zirin scientists discovered that human DNA was adaptive, able to bond with our own species in a way no other race could. They believed humans could be the key to creating perfect warriors, stronger, faster, nearly invincible." Daniel's stomach turned. "You mean they experimented on humans?" Zaira's expression darkened. "Yes." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, stepping closer to the glass tubes. He looked at the faces inside, some peaceful, others twisted in silent agony. This wasn't just history. This was ongoing. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. Zaira hesitated. "Hundreds of years." Daniel felt a wave of cold rage settle into his chest. So this was why the Zirin Empire had suddenly become interested in human alliances. Not because they respected Earth, not because they wanted peace, but because they saw humans as raw materials for their experiments. He was never meant to leave this planet alive. "The truth about the marriage." Daniel turned back to Zaira, voice tight with fury. "And what does this have to do with our marriage?" Zaira looked away. And in that moment, Daniel knew. He didn't need her to answer. The pieces clicked into place. "I wasn't chosen because I saved you," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "I was chosen because I'm human." Zaira closed her eyes. "Yes." Daniel laughed bitterly, shaking his head. This was never about honor. This was never about tradition. He turned toward her, his fists clenched. "This was about breeding me into your damn experiments." Zaira flinched but didn't deny it. "At first, yes," she admitted, her voice low. "The Emperor believed that by marrying a human warrior, especially one as strong as you, it would create a new superior bloodline." Daniel stared at her, a super soldier, a living experiment. He had been trapped from the start. Zaira's eyes flashed with frustration. "But I never agreed with this." Daniel scoffed. "That's real comforting, princess." She stepped closer, her voice fierce. "Do you think I wanted this?" Daniel glared at her, his heart pounding. "You knew this was wrong. And yet, you let it happen." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "I was trying to stop it. That's why I brought you here. To show you the truth. If we don't stop this now, it will never end." Daniel clenched his jaw. For a moment, they just stood there, two warriors from different worlds, both caught in a war they hadn't chosen. Then, a sharp alarm blared. Daniel's head snapped toward the door. Footsteps, dozens of them, coming fast. Zaira's face paled. "They found us." The escape. Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed a metal rod from the table and smashed it against the nearest glass tube. The alarm screamed louder. Zaira's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Daniel pulled a weak, unconscious human man from the liquid, his breath shallow but still alive. "I'm not leaving without them," Daniel growled. Zaira hesitated. Then she nodded. She drew her twin swords, stepping in front of the door. "I'll hold them off." Daniel rushed to the control panel, scanning the interface. His eyes flickered over the release commands. He had no idea how to read Zirin technology, but there was one thing he knew. Big red buttons usually mean trouble. He slammed his fist down on the nearest one. The tubes burst open, blue liquid spilling onto the floor. The humans inside collapsed, weak and shivering. Daniel grabbed one over his shoulder, pulling him to his feet. "Move." The doors exploded inward. A squad of elite guards stormed in, weapons raised. But Sarah was already moving. She leaped forward, slicing through the first guard before they even had a chance to fire. Her blade spun like lightning, cutting through the squad with brutal efficiency. Daniel pushed forward, dragging the weakened humans toward a side door. He didn't know where it led. Didn't care. He just had to get out. As he ran, Syra's voice echoed behind him. Sharp, desperate, fierce. Go. Daniel didn't look back. He ran into the darkness, carrying the truth with him. A truth that could bring down the entire Zyran Empire. Betrayal and escape. The underground corridors of the Zyran Palace were dimly lit, the flickering energy lights casting long shadows along the cold metallic walls. Daniel ran, his breath sharp in his chest, his arms burning as he carried the half-conscious human over his shoulder. Behind him, the sounds of battle roared. The clash of Syra's twin blades against the elite guards' weapons, the screams of dying warriors, the hum of energy guns charging up. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth was finally out. The Zyran Empire wasn't just playing politics with Earth. They were using humans as lab rats, experimenting on them, and keeping them locked in stasis like specimens in a museum. And worst of all, the entire marriage arrangement had been nothing more than a scheme to turn him into their next experiment. Daniel's jaw tightened as he pushed forward, dragging the barely breathing human man through the maze of underground passageways. He could hear the others stumbling behind him, the newly freed prisoners, weak and disoriented, but clinging to whatever strength they had left. He turned a corner, spotting a narrow staircase spiraling upward. A way out, or another trap. No time to decide. He took the risk. The chase begins. The first steps creaked beneath his boots, the weight of the unconscious man slowing him down. Behind him, one of the other prisoners, a frail woman with sunken eyes and pale skin, stumbled. Daniel caught her before she fell. "Stay with me," he grunted. She nodded weakly, gripping his arm. Footsteps thundered from below. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder. They were coming. The elite Zyran hunters, Varkan's personal assassins, warriors trained for one purpose: to eliminate threats before they reached the surface. They moved too fast. Daniel cursed under his breath. Move. Move. The prisoners scrambled up the stairs, fear giving them just enough adrenaline to keep running. The moment Daniel reached the top of the staircase, he slammed his shoulder against the rusted metal door. It didn't budge. He tried again. Nothing. The footsteps were getting closer. Daniel's mind raced. No time. No weapons. Think. He took a step back, scanned the hinges, and then, BM. He kicked the door at the weakest point near the handle. The metal groaned, then snapped open, the hinges barely holding as the entire frame shuddered. Daniel shoved it open, ushering the prisoners through. Go. One by one, they stumbled into the new hallway, a service passage leading toward the outer walls of the palace. But just as Daniel turned to follow, something heavy slammed into his back. Ambushed. Daniel hit the ground hard, the force knocking the breath from his lungs. A sharp pain exploded across his ribs as something, or someone, pinned him down. He rolled instinctively, narrowly avoiding a blade aimed at his throat. A hunter stood above him, cloaked in dark armor, his eyes glowing red with cybernetic enhancements. Weak, the hunter sneered. The Emperor believes your kind can be our equals. I think not. Daniel barely had time to move before the hunter lunged again, this time faster. Too fast. But Daniel had been in too many fights to go down easy. At the last second, he shifted his weight, grabbed a loose piece of the broken doorframe, and, salam, drove it straight into the hunter's side. The alien grunted, stumbling back. Daniel pushed up from the ground, blood pounding in his ears. He didn't wait. He grabbed the hunter's own fallen blade, flipping it in his grip. The hunter's eyes widened in shock. Then Daniel drove the blade straight into his chest. The alien let out a final gurgled breath, then collapsed. Daniel exhaled hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. No time to stop. No time to think. He turned and sprinted after the others. The betrayal. By the time he caught up, the prisoners had reached an open courtyard, a vast space surrounded by towering walls, with a single massive gate leading out into the city beyond. Daniel's heart soared. They were almost free. He turned to the control panel beside the gate, his fingers flying over the interface. A security screen blinked to life. Access denied. Daniel gritted his teeth. Of course, nothing was ever this easy. Before he could try again, a deep voice echoed across the courtyard. Going somewhere, Captain. Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned slowly. Varkin stood at the entrance, surrounded by dozens of elite guards. Daniel's grip on the stolen blade tightened. Varkin's smirk widened. Did you really think you could just walk away? The prisoners behind Daniel shrank back, their eyes filled with terror. Daniel's mind raced. Outnumbered. Outgunned. No easy exits. But he wasn't alone. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Then, boom. The wall to the left exploded, sending a shockwave of dust and fire through the courtyard. As the smoke cleared, a familiar figure emerged. She stood atop the rubble, her twin swords glowing with alien energy, her face set with determination. Daniel, move, she shouted. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest prisoner and ran. Zyra leaped into battle, her blades flashing as she cut down the first row of guards. Varkin cursed, barking orders, but the chaos was already spreading. Daniel slammed his fist against the control panel again, this time overriding the gate manually. It groaned open, just enough for them to escape. The prisoners rushed forward, spilling into the city streets beyond. Zyra covered their backs, blocking Varkin's advance with a final powerful strike. Then she turned and ran after Daniel. The city swallowed them whole. The aftermath. By the time they reached the outer slums, the adrenaline had started to wear off. The prisoners were weak but alive. Daniel and Sarah stood on a rooftop overlooking the palace, watching the flames still burning in the distance. Daniel turned to her. Why did you come back? Zyra didn't look at him. Because you were right. Daniel frowned. About what? She exhaled. Everything. For the first time, he saw guilt in her eyes. The Zyran Empire had built itself on lies, blood, and stolen lives. And now, that truth was out. But the fight wasn't over. Varkin wouldn't stop hunting them. The Emperor wouldn't forgive betrayal. Daniel and Sarah had one chance, to take the fight to them, before it was too late. The final warning. The night sky above Zyran's capital was painted in streaks of red and orange, the distant fires of battle still burning within the palace walls. The city below was a sprawling maze of towering spires and neon-lit alleys, but for the moment, it was eerily silent. Daniel stood on the rooftop of an abandoned structure, scanning the horizon. The group of escaped prisoners huddled together behind him, their bodies weak and trembling from years of captivity. Some whispered among themselves, their voices filled with relief, but also fear. Princess Zyra stood beside him, her twin blades strapped to her back. She didn't speak, but Daniel could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They had escaped the palace. They had exposed the Zyran Empire's darkest secret, but now they had to survive the fallout. Daniel took a deep breath and turned to Zyra. They're going to come for us. She nodded, her face grim. They won't just come for us. They'll wipe out anyone who knows the truth. A chilling realization settled over them. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about war. The Emperor's wrath. Far across the city, within the grand halls of the Zyran Palace, the Emperor sat upon his throne, his expression unreadable. The room was filled with his most powerful advisors, high-ranking generals, and elite strategists. Varkan knelt before him, his face bruised from battle, his armor still smeared with blood. "They escaped," Varkan admitted, his voice low. The room fell into silence. The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed. His fingers tapped against the armrest of his throne, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a chill through the room. Then, his voice, cold and measured. "Where are they now?" Varkan hesitated. "Somewhere in the city." The Emperor exhaled sharply, the weight of his disappointment settling over the room like a storm. "You have failed me, Varkan." Varkan's jaw clenched. "I will find them." The Emperor's eyes glowed faintly as he considered his nephew. Then he spoke. "No, you have had your chance." Varkan tensed. "What does that mean?" The Emperor slowly stood from his throne, his long robes flowing around him like liquid shadows. "It means that the time for subtlety is over." He turned to his gathered generals. "Send the hunters. Activate the planetary lockdown. No ships leave. No one enters. If they try to run, kill them all." Hunted. Back in the city, Daniel and Sarah had just finished securing a temporary hiding spot in an abandoned storage facility when a deep rumbling sound filled the air. Daniel's head snapped up. "That's not good." Zyra's face was pale. They'd locked down the planet. Above them, massive metal barriers began to rise around the city's perimeter, sealing off every possible exit route. The Zyran Empire wasn't just looking for them. They were trapping them. Daniel's pulse quickened. They were running out of time. "We need to move. Now." The prisoners were exhausted, but they pushed forward, following Daniel and Syra through the maze-like streets of the lower city. Then, a sharp whistle cut through the night air. Daniel's blood ran cold. Zyra froze beside him. "They found us." A moment later, figures emerged from the shadows. Dressed in sleek black armor, their faces hidden beneath helmets with glowing red visors, the hunters of Zirin stepped into the moonlight. Silent, calculating, deadly. These weren't just soldiers. These were killers trained for one purpose: eliminate threats before they could ever become a problem. And right now, Daniel and Syra were the biggest threats in the Empire. The battle in the streets. The first hunter moved without warning, disappearing in a blur of motion. Daniel barely had time to react before a blade sliced toward his throat. He ducked. The razor-sharp weapon missed by inches, cutting through the air where his head had just been. Zyra was already moving, her twin swords flashing as she met another hunter head-on. The prisoners scrambled for cover, their fear evident. Daniel rolled across the ground, grabbing a metal pipe from the rubble. It wasn't much, but it was something. He turned, just in time to block another attack. The force sent him staggering back, pain shooting up his arms. "Dan, these guys were fast." Zyra took down the first hunter with a swift strike, but 3 more moved in instantly, their weapons humming with energy. They were surrounded. Daniel knew they couldn't win this fight. Not like this. They had to run. A desperate escape. Daniel's mind raced. They needed a distraction. Something big. Then he saw it. A nearby power station, its energy core exposed beneath a crumbling structure. Bingo. Daniel grabbed a shard of metal, aimed carefully, and threw it. The jagged edge pierced the energy conduit, sending sparks flying. A moment later, boom! The explosion rocked the street, sending smoke and debris into the air. The hunters stumbled back, momentarily blinded. That was their chance. "Go!" Daniel shouted. Zyra grabbed his arm, pulling him into the chaos. The prisoners followed, vanishing into the smoke. They ran. Through narrow alleys, over collapsed buildings, through the underbelly of the city, until they finally reached the edge of an abandoned docking bay. Daniel's lungs burned, but they weren't safe yet. Zyra scanned the area. "We need a way off this planet." Daniel nodded. "Then we find a ship." But before they could move, a slow clapping sound echoed through the empty docking bay. Daniel, and Xaira froze. A lone figure stepped into the dim light. Tall, dressed in regal armor, a cold smirk on his face. Varkan. And behind him, an entire army of Zyran soldiers. Going somewhere, Varkan sneered. Daniel exhaled sharply. Damn it. They had walked right into his trap. The final warning. Varkan took a step forward, his eyes gleaming with amusement. You're outnumbered. Surrender now, and I promise your deaths will be quick. Daniel and Sarah exchanged a glance. No way in hell. But they were trapped. Out of weapons, out of plans. Nowhere left to run. The soldiers raised their rifles. Varkan smirked. Last chance, human. Daniel clenched his fists. Then, from above, a shadow moved. A low hum filled the air. And then, a ship decloaked above them, weapons primed and ready. A familiar voice crackled through the comms. Need a ride? Daniel's eyes widened. It was Earth's fleet. Help had arrived. And now, it was time to fight back. War and sacrifice. The air trembled as the Earth fleet's massive warship descended from the sky, its engines roaring like a storm. The sleek, gunmetal-colored ship hovered above the docking bay, its cannons primed, targeting the Zyran forces below. Daniel's heart pounded. Reinforcements had arrived. But the battle wasn't over yet. Across the bay, Varkan's soldiers stood frozen, momentarily stunned by the sudden arrival of the human warship. The glow of its thrusters bathed the area in a flickering blue light, shadows dancing across the metal walls. A moment of silence. Then, Varkan laughed. Slow, amused, mocking. Daniel tensed. Something was wrong. Varkan took a step forward, arms crossed over his armored chest. Do you think a single ship changes anything, Captain? His voice dripped with arrogance. This is the Zyran Empire. This is our world. And you, he smirked, are already dead. Daniel's eyes flickered to Xaira. She was already drawing her swords, her body tense, ready for what was coming. And then, the sky split open. The fleet arrives. From above, the Zyran war fleet emerged from the darkness of space. Dozens of massive capital ships, their black hulls glinting under the planet's twin moons. The massive warships began descending, their cannons locking onto the single Earth vessel below. The comms on Daniel's wrist crackled to life. Captain Carter, this is Admiral Reynolds of the UES Aegis. We are engaging the enemy, but we are severely outnumbered. We need a plan. Now. Daniel clenched his jaw. The Earth fleet had come to rescue them, but they were walking into a trap. Varkan's army wasn't just here to stop them. This was an extermination. Xaira cursed under her breath. If they destroy that ship, we lose our only way out. Daniel's mind raced. They couldn't just run. They needed to fight back. But how? The Zyran Empire had firepower, numbers, and home field advantage. And then, a desperate idea hit him. Daniel turned to Xaira. The planetary shields. Can we shut them down? Xaira's eyes widened. You're insane. Daniel grinned. That's not a no. Xaira hesitated. Then she nodded. The shield generators are deep inside the capital. We'll have to fight our way through. Daniel turned to the prisoners. Get to the ship. Go now. One of the former captives stepped forward, a woman with deep scars along her arms, her eyes fierce despite her weakened body. No, she said firmly. We fight. Daniel looked at her, looked at the others. These weren't just survivors anymore. They were warriors. They wanted to take their revenge. He nodded. Then let's end this. Storming the capital. The battle erupted across the city. Daniel, Xaira, and a group of fierce warriors cut their way through Zyran soldiers, moving through the war-torn streets of the capital. The once pristine buildings were now scared by fire, smoke rising in thick black columns as explosions rocked the ground. Above them, the Earth fleet engaged the Zyran Armada, missiles and plasma fire streaking across the sky, lighting up the darkness in a deadly dance of destruction. The shield generators were their only hope. If they could shut them down, the Earth fleet could bring in reinforcements, and they might just have a chance. But the Zyran forces were relentless. As they approached the central tower, Daniel's team was pinned down behind a collapsed transport vehicle, energy blasts whizzing past their heads. They were outgunned, and time was running out. Then, Thyra touched his shoulder. "I'll create a distraction," she said. Daniel froze. He knew what she meant. "No asterisk asterisk." He grabbed her wrist asterisk asterisk. "We do this together." Thyra gave him a small, sad smile. "If I don't buy you time, we all die." Daniel's heart twisted, but he saw it in her eyes. This wasn't a choice. This was who she was. A warrior, a princess, and now, a sacrifice. Thyra turned and ran, her blades flashing as she charged into the Zyran forces alone. Daniel watched, helpless, as she cut through them like a storm, her body a blur of motion, fighting with everything she had. She was buying them time, and Daniel wouldn't waste it. "Move E," he shouted. His team rushed forward, slipping through the opening Thyra had created. But as they entered the tower, Daniel made one final mistake. He looked back, and what he saw would haunt him forever. The fall of the princess. Thyra fought with the fury of a dying star, cutting through enemy after enemy, but even she was not invincible. She took a hit to the side, blood spraying across the ground. Then another, and another. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Thyra." She turned to him, just for a moment. And in that moment, Varkan appeared behind her, a blade in his hand, a cruel smile on his lips. Daniel's world slowed. He tried to move, tried to reach her in time, but he was too late. Varkan's blade sank deep into her back, piercing through her armor, cutting through flesh and bone. Thyra gasped, her body shuddering. For a moment, asterisk asterisk, just a brief fleeting moment. Asterisk asterisk, she looked at Daniel. And then she fell. Daniel's mind went blank. His breath caught in his chest, his entire body frozen in place. No, 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 no. Varkan ripped the blade free, letting her body collapse onto the blood-stained ground. He met Daniel's gaze and smirked. Checkmate. A warrior's rage. Something inside Daniel snapped. All the exhaustion, all the pain, all the anger. It burned inside him. Varkan didn't even have time to react. Daniel charged. A scream of pure fury tore from his throat. He hit Varkan like a meteor, slamming into him with all the force of his rage. They crashed into the rubble, weapons clashing, fists flying, both men fighting to kill. Daniel didn't feel the pain, didn't hear the battle around him. There was only one thought in his mind. Varkan dies tonight. The royal bond. The world blurred as Daniel and Varkan crashed into the rubble, their bodies slamming against the cold metal of the ruined cityscape. The battle raged on around them. Earth's fleet clashed against the Zyran armada, explosions lighting up the dark sky, while soldiers fought and died in the streets below. But Daniel saw none of it. There was only Varkan, the murderer of Thyra, the warrior who had taken everything from him. Daniel's fists collided with Varkan's face, a raw, savage punch that sent the Zyran warlord staggering backward. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He lunged forward again, swinging a broken piece of metal like a club. Varkan barely managed to dodge, but Daniel was relentless, his mind consumed by pure, raging fury. "You took her from me," Daniel roared. Varkan wiped the blood from his mouth and grinned. She was weak. Daniel's vision went red. He swung the makeshift weapon, aiming for the kill. But Varkan was still fast. He sidestepped at the last second, grabbing Daniel's arm and twisting it behind his back. Pain exploded through Daniel's shoulder as Varkan drove a knee into his stomach, knocking the air from his lungs. Daniel staggered, gasping, but refused to fall. Not now. Not when he was this close to vengeance. Varkan smirked, spinning his blade in his hand. Face it, human. You don't belong in our world. Daniel clenched his fists. I didn't belong in yours. But she did. And she had chosen to fight for him. She had believed in him. And he wasn't about to let her death be for nothing. The warrior's last stand. Daniel charged again, this time faster, smarter. Instead of swinging wildly, he ducked low, slipping past Varkan's defense and driving his elbow into his ribs. Varkan grunted, stumbling back. Daniel pressed the attack, his movements now fueled by more than just rage, by purpose, by Xyra's memory, by the warriors who had trusted him to lead them. Varkan swung his blade again, a deadly, precise arc. But Daniel was ready. He caught the Zyron's wrist mid-strike, twisting it with all his strength. The blade clattered to the ground. For the first time, Varkan's expression flickered with doubt. Daniel didn't hesitate. He slammed his knee into Varkan's chest, knocking him to the ground. Varkan coughed, struggling to rise. But Daniel was already moving. He grabbed Varkan's own blade from the ground, flipped it in his grip, and drove it through his heart. Varkan's eyes widened in shock. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then, slowly, he collapsed, his body hitting the blood-stained rubble. Daniel stood over him, breathing hard, his hands shaking. It was over. Varkan was dead. But as he turned toward the battlefield, he realized the war was still raging. And it wouldn't end until they finished what they started. A kingdom without a heir. The planetary shield generators still stood, towering above the city like metal monoliths, glowing with energy. As long as they remained active, the Earth fleet was trapped. Daniel stumbled forward, his wounds catching up with him, but he didn't stop. Not yet. His team was already inside, fighting to override the system. We're close, one of the former prisoners shouted, but the system's locked. We need the Emperor's code to shut it down completely. Daniel's mind raced. The Emperor's code. His gaze flickered toward the palace. There was only one place where that code could be accessed. Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran. The Emperor's final choice. The palace halls were silent when Daniel entered. The battle outside seemed distant, muffled by the thick walls. And at the end of the grand chamber, seated upon his throne, was the Emperor of Zyren. He looked old, far older than he had before, his golden robe stained with ash, his piercing blue eyes unreadable. Daniel didn't slow down. He marched toward the throne, his body burning with pain, but his heart unyielding. The Emperor watched him approach, then finally spoke. It is done, then. Daniel clenched his jaw. Varkan is dead. The Emperor sighed. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. And now my people are leaderless. Daniel didn't answer. The Emperor slowly stood. And what would you have me do, Captain Carter? Surrender my empire. Daniel met his gaze. End the war. Lower the shields. Stop this before more people die. The Emperor studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised his hand. A nearby console blinked to life. Daniel held his breath as the Emperor entered the final command. A deep mechanical hum echoed through the city. And then, the planetary shields fell. Above, the Earth fleet surged forward, breaking through Zyren's defenses. The war was over, or at least the worst of it. The Emperor let out a slow breath. This is not the end of Zyren, Captain Carter. Daniel nodded. No, but it's a new beginning. The Emperor sat back on his throne, silent once more. Daniel took a deep breath, then turned and walked away. The bond that remains. The city was still burning when Daniel returned. The warriors, those who had survived, were gathered in the ruined square, the ashes of war settling around them. But Daniel's heart was heavy. Zyra was gone. She had given her life so they could live. As he stood among the warriors, A voice cut through the silence. She wouldn't want you to grieve. Daniel turned. One of the surviving Zyran warriors stepped forward, a small silver pendant in his hand. Zyra's pendant, the one she had always worn, the one she had never taken off. Daniel took it carefully, the metal still warm from her touch. The warrior nodded. She chose you, not as an experiment, not as a soldier, but as her equal. Daniel clenched the pendant in his fist. Then finally he allowed himself to grieve. For Xyra, for what they had lost, and for what they had won. The war was over, but her memory, it would live on, forever. A new legacy. Months later, the Zyran Empire and Earth signed the first peace treaty in history. Daniel was there, standing among the new leaders, watching as a new era unfolded before them. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a prince. But he was something more. A warrior. A survivor. And perhaps, in a way, a part of Zyran, too. As he looked up at the stars, he could almost hear Xyra's voice in the wind. And he knew, wherever she was, she would be proud.